I guess, I'm just curious about your background because, you come into the industry in a different way to most people because of your background in servicing. How did you get into it?
My background starts a long time ago when I was a teenager. And it starts with the interest for music and then for the sound eventually, because music became a big part, a very important part of my life. So let's say that I wanted to listen to this music in a best possible way. So I started to explore the sound. And it was important the fact that my father had separate stereo system with separates at home, so I experienced what is a turntable or a tape recorder or a tuner or an amplifier and speakers. So when I grew up, I wanted to make my own system, and so then I started to be more interested how this works, because I was curious since I was small about everything to learn how it works.
And so when you were playing with your equipment at home with your father's system, were you mixing and matching to work out how things went together properly?
Not really. I just noticed that the recordings sounded different. I didn't know exactly why when I was small, but in the long run I found out. And so I like technology a lot, so I started to experiment with some electronic circuits when I was a teenager. Just an FM radio or an FM transmitter, or some automation circuits as well to find out how electronics work. But my main interest was audio, the audio circuits. So I started to experiment with them. And at some point I made my first, let's say, amplifier.
Was that something that you expressly set out to do, or was it just something you fell into? Did you look at audio particularly, or were you looking at other aspects as well of electronics?
I was looking audio particularly, actually. At some point I developed an amplifier that sounded better than my current system.
What type of amplifier was it? What type of circuit?
It was based on tubes. And when I did this, it was actually good enough. So then I put a goal to myself to make a preamp better than the preamp I had in that time. This was a quite expensive one. So this was the target was, I put, very high expectations to myself. So I had to sit down and work hard and find out how to do that.
Was the system at home in your father's system, was that a solid state or a tube system?
It was a solid state. It was an old Sansui system, actually, from the, early 70s, very early 70s.
So why did you try a tube system rather than a solid state system for your first design?
Because in my hi-fi adventure, I found out at some point that I prefer the tubes over the solid state, at least for what I have experienced so far, So I was not 100% sure that I prefer one technology over the other, but because I had limited experience, But the main thing is that it took me 2 years to make a better preamp than my current one.
And how was it better?
Yeah, that's a good question. It was better in every aspect. Better imaging, better dynamics, more bandwidth, wider bandwidth, which means more resolution, more transparent. Transparency means that when you change the recording, you change the music, or even within the same album, you should listen all these differences in the production or in the recording. So when you get this information, you understand that you are in the right path.
So when you were designing it, did you have a goal in mind of how you wanted it to sound, or did you just want? How did you go about that process?
Yeah, some things happened due to my perception, some other things just by accident. For example, I realized at some point that these high sensitive speakers are more revealing and more close to the live event, to the real thing, let's say. So for me, always the goal was the real thing. It was not about mellow sound, it was not about accuracy, it was not about, bass or treble or mid rates. The main thing was the real thing, how an instrument sounds without amplification. And I found out that this comes close when you have sensitive speakers with big drivers and very dynamic electronics. So that's why the dynamic range is, I think, the most important.
So with that first system you built, was it a very complex circuit or was it a simplistic circuit?
It was a very simple circuit. And I found out that simplicity is the most important part. But when you use simple circuits, you have to fight with noise problems. You have to fight with some other reliability probably problems and things like that. So you have to address all this because it's not the same to make a product for yourself, to make a prototype, a do-it-yourself, unit for yourself, or to put it in production, because you have to address the cost, the reliability, and various other things like the user interface, So the thing is that after these 2 years, I had finally a better, amplifier, and I decided to make a brand because of that, not the other way around.
What was your transition from school into the workforce?
I have studied something completely different than electronics. I am a self-taught in electronics. But I studied design. So I worked with design for many years, especially, user interface and graphic design. And I have studied actually 3D animation. So I learned to design in 3D. So this helped me because to develop the chassis and the mechanics and the user interface as well, which is critical for a commercial product, of course. But I would say that I had a gap between the early 90s and the late 2000s that I was working only with computers during these years, and I left the analog electronic circuits, and I started in the late 2000s to develop the first amplifier.
And so with your transition from working in the artistic space to computers, how did you get back into the servicing side of electronics? Was that a natural transition?
No, it was not. It happened by accident, and it was because mainly I moved to Sweden. So this was a job that appeared to me that I could do. It was not my goal to work as a service technician. I had knowledge from my background with do-it-yourself electronics, but I can't say that I was an expert in servicing. So I had to learn a lot of things, and I educated myself because I didn't have any mentor to help me. But this helped me eventually because I learned a lot about other circuits, mechanics, components, reliability issues as well, because I had to repair many design flaws that other manufacturers did, for example. And I liked the units that they were made to last for as long as possible, and they were designed to be serviced easily without a special, knowledge or something.
Is there a specific era in the sort of history of audio electronics that you prefer or that gave you inspiration?
I would say that I prefer for amplification, I would say that I prefer, the 60s up to the first years in the 70s, because everything was more simple and there was a real engineering. There was no integrated circuits. So the engineers, they had to fight with noise and with other issues, the bandwidth, the frequency response, all these issues that today it's not any issue for anyone. And for speakers, I would go probably even before that because, I think that some of the greatest designs were made without compromise in the 40s and 50s. And then what happened is the legacy of these designs were shrinked to smaller size to fit at home or something like that, but always with a compromise.
So it's the simplicity of the circuitry in the early days that you think is key to its success because you've got fewer components in the pathway, or why is that so?
I guess that it's mainly for two reasons. One is the simplicity of the circuits, and the second thing is that it's the quality of the components. The components in the past were more reliable, they were made to last, they had more natural tone, but they were not so accurate, so they had higher tolerances. So the tolerance was wider. Today the tolerances are very tight, but the components, they tend to distort the tonality of the signal.
Okay, so if you look at the components that were available in that era, were they all of higher quality, or were they just made as good as they could be and not down to a price? Where do you think that balance was? Why do you think they were so good?
Because in the 50s and 60s, there was a completely different approach in manufacturing, not only in electronics, but in everything. So everything was made to last for a lifetime, not just to fail after a while. And especially today, many components are programmed to fail on purpose. And that's a big problem, actually.
And so I guess everything's being built down to a price now. If you look at things like resistors and capacitors that are key elements in how you design a circuit, are they designed to a price and as a result the designers just get what there is available?
I would say that it's a very wide range of components today, from extremely reliable, accurate and good sounding to very inexpensive, unreliable, without any, some kind of approach in designing to last longer, just to do the job, for as cheap as possible, for as affordable as possible, to make, the units, to drop the price of the units, to keep the price low, actually.
So from the perspective of an audio company, there are fewer components that are suitable for the job, and common off-the-shelf components are really only suitable for other applications, in your view?
Yeah, I would say I would agree with that in general, yes. But the trick today is that there are some amazing sounding components that they are expensive. So if you make a commercial product and you want to keep the price, in a reasonable level, you have to find out how to get the sound using industrial components. And this can be complicated and it can take time, actually, this research.
So it is possible to get the same sort of sound from what would be considered potentially technically inferior products, but it becomes a balancing act. Or is there some other way to do it?
I would not say that they are technically inferior, but definitely they don't have this audiophile character that someone would require for his designs. So you have to combine more than one to get the best out of more, of the combination.
So in terms of the components that are available inexpensively, they haven't been designed with audio characteristics in mind, and therefore it's a balancing act to get the best out of the components.
So, for example, you can get a capacitor that sounds bright and another one that sounds dark. One can sound warm and the other can sound cold, or dry or thin or whatever. So if you want to get a particular sound, you have to combine more than one to get the best out of it, or to get the character you want. So in this case, you will use industrial grade components that they are usually more reliable than the audiophile ones, because the audiophile ones are made by companies that they have very small production, and they don't make all these tests that a big industry, a big factory, a big manufacturer would do to be sure that everything is fine. So but on the other hand, it's quite complicated and takes time, so you have to make many listening tests for days or for weeks or for years. You have to burn in the components, because you never know exactly what is going on, if you want to be sure, I mean. So this can keep the cost low without sacrificing the quality of the sound, let's say.
So given the fact that the audiophile components are from generally smaller production runs, with perhaps less oversight on quality or standardization maybe, do you think there's more variability in the audiophile components than in the industrial ones?
Absolutely. We have today, it's endless choices, from all over the world. You can find components in Asia, in Europe, in US. So audiophile, and some of them, they have a quite good price, I would say. But I prefer the stability of the industrial components and the availability as well, because that's an issue also. If something comes from a big factory or a big manufacturer, you know that it will always have the same characteristics and it will be always available in a good price. So, yeah.
So if we just step back a bit to your experience in servicing audio gear, what are the key lessons that you learned? We might have already discussed the key lessons, but are there any other things that come from that experience that transition directly into your design philosophy?
First, I have to say that I had the goal to design, to make a brand before starting being a professional service technician. So what I got from my servicing experience is how other engineers, other people would solve a problem, or would actually design something that sounds good, because everyone had a completely different approach for the same thing. And this led in various, problems as well. Sometimes reliability problems, sometimes performance problems, Sometimes someone had the restriction of the cost and he should do something very good without... It's about the philosophy of the design. Sometimes engineers are focusing in reliability, they don't care about performance so much, and in user interface and design, some other times they leave this behind and they focus on performance. So, and the countries around the world, they have a certain philosophy in sound and in construction ways as well. So
you're trying to achieve the best combination of all of those things at a price that is affordable for the customer.
the most important thing for me is the performance. This is something that I don't want to compromise. The second thing is the reliability, and the third thing is the user interface and the design. So since I have studies in design, this was quite easy for me to get a nice design. But the other two things, they need a lot of experience as well. So, for example, the transportation of the unit is an issue because the transportation companies, they can drop the package and they can damage it, and you have to predict so how it will be handled. And this is not very easy when you are in the beginning because you don't know exactly what is going on. So for example, I had to reinforce the chassis many times.
Something you said earlier was about how you use your ears in your listening environment to optimize the product, and it all comes down to high efficiency loudspeakers. So you want to talk about that process, why they're more important?
Firstly, I chose high efficiency speakers because I found out that they are closer to the real thing. But when I started to develop circuits and make listening tests, I found out that if a circuit sounds good in a very high efficiency speaker, then it will probably sound good with everything else. And this is a key element of my designs, together with the fact that I know that everything I'm using, how exactly sounds. So I know how my cable sounds, how my component sounds, how my speakers sounds exactly. So if something goes wrong, I will understood it completely immediately because I know how it should sound. So in other words, that you should have always a reference to rely on, to make comparison and all that.
So I guess what you're saying is that low efficiency loudspeakers tend to hide the detail which is exposed by a high efficiency speaker.
Yeah, because we have to see it as a microdynamic information. So when you have a low efficiency speaker, you lose microdynamics. They are compressed. There is actually inertia on the drivers that eats the low level information or the small microdynamic contrast. And you can't get this with high power amplification, because when you raise up the volume, you already lost the low level information. So it's critical to have something extremely transparent and revealing when you test circuits, components, or whatever else. So I develop everything myself, the cables and everything, because I want to have full control over the whole path.
So one of the things that I find, particularly with music, and perhaps you can comment on this, is that a lot of the emotion in music is transmitted not by the dynamics per se, but the subtle contrast between the highs and the lows. So it's the contrast in the music.
Mm-hmm. But you mean the frequency contrast or the dynamic contrast?
Dynamic contrast.
The dynamic contrast is the most critical thing, I think, in the signal. And I believe that it's more important than the frequency response or the flat frequency response. So it is important to have a flat frequency, and to have a wide bandwidth for, let's say, 20 hertz or 20 kilohertz. But the dynamic performance, the contrast in dynamics is more important, because this is what the music carries. And this is something that most of the people, they haven't experienced in the full scale. So it's important to reveal the contrast in dynamics, because this is actually the information, the music information.
For somebody who doesn't understand what dynamic contrast means, how would you describe it to that person?
Yeah, I would describe it as in some way the dynamic contrast reveals more resolution into music. So you get more information, more resolution without being brighter, actually. So when you have enough dynamics, you get all the information, because the distance between the low and the high passages, or the low and the higher sounds, they have bigger distance between them. So it's more easy for the ear to understand what's going on, to separate the instruments, or to separate the playing style of the musician. Because when you have this dynamic contrast, it's more easy to recognize how the musician plays the instrument, or how the production is made, or how many instruments that they are inside the recording. So let's say that this is the opposite of the compression. It's the same problem with a loudness war in the recording industry, that when you set in the same level all the instruments in the recording and the voice, then you can't hear anything, because everything is crowded. It's overlapping. So that's the problem. This is what the dynamic contrast solves, the overlapping.
Yeah, that's a really good explanation. So if you look at visually, your products kind of have a bit of a hint back to the 70s, in my view. Was that an intentional thing, or was it just a design concept that you had, or was it an intentional link to the past?
So it is intentional, but not because of my love for vintage designs. So I think that a classic design lasts forever, doesn't go out of fashion. It integrates better within a living environment, and the ergonomics are better because there is a knob or a switch per function. You don't have to search through menus or hidden functions or whatever. And minimalism, which usually the reason for very little, knobs or switches, is nice, but it doesn't actually help the user to interact with a unit, to make a closer relationship between the product and the human. So the knobs and the switches is something that you can touch, you can feel, and this gives a different, approach, different relationship with the product.
Where do you want to go with your products next? What's the next few products that you have in mind, if you want to talk about them at all?
I have plans for a bigger integrated, for preamp, power amps, DAC, and a more expensive phono stage probably. The phono stage is a quite important product for Moonriver, because it will give a push to the analog formats. It will show to some people that the analog formats are not dead, and they are capable for high resolution and high performance, because only a few people know about that probably, or experience that. And so the important thing is to have consistency. So sound-wise, everything should have some connection. Everything has the same identity, the same sound character, and the same more or less design as well, to be recognizable. So the strong identity is very important. And then it's a matter of, power or how extended a system someone wants to be. So some people want all in one, everything in a box, in one box. Some other people, they want to have an extended system with separate components, separate probably preamps, power supplies, and whatever. This gives better performance, but with a cost, of course, and with more bigger size, so it takes more space and all that.
Okay. So what's your favorite format for listening? I know you've got DAT, you've got cassette, you've got open reel, vinyl. What do you listen to if you, what's your favorite format?
I would say that I'm a freak of all formats. I like all formats, even some lo-fi ones. I have even VHS. I have 5 or 6 VCRs from the past. I have CRT TVs and all that, because everything has. It's like the analog synthesizers, for example, or or some lo-fi instruments, I can't say that there is a favorite format, because it depends on the moment, and it depends on the situation. Sometimes I work in the computer, I want to listen to music and have control over the music, so I play music through the computer, through my personal library or something. Some other times I like to listen a vinyl record, and some other times I can play a cassette. So what sounds better? This would be an interesting question. To me, from all the available formats, probably the vinyl sounds better than anything else, but this comes with a cost. You need special equipment, special records with special pressing and all that. And it's not for probably every day. It's like this, sport or vintage sports car you have in your garage, and you take it out every weekend just for
fun.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's covered. That's great. Got a lot of material there.
You think?
I think we can make a lot of good stuff out of that.